After years of working long nights and saving every coin in the busy city of Lusanda, I finally bought my dream home. It wasn't just a house to me, it was proof that all my struggles had been worth it. Out of love, I opened the doors to my family. They were struggling, and I thought giving them a safe place to live, rent-free, was the right thing to do. I believed blood would always mean loyalty. At first, everything felt warm and right, but slowly, things started to change. The people I loved began to act differently. Whispers behind my back turned into commands, like I was just a guest instead of the one who owned the place. I brushed it off, thinking it was just tension or stress, but deep down I could feel the respect fading. Then came the night that changed everything. We were sitting in the living room, and the air felt heavier than usual. My eldest brother stared at me with eyes I barely recognized. He didn't smile, didn't blink. Just leaned forward and said, in a cold voice that cut through me, "This isn't your house anymore." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The walls that once felt safe now felt like they were closing in. In that moment, I realized the home I had built with love had turned into the very place where my own family betrayed me. I had given up everything for my family. When times were hard, I sold my jewelry, piece by piece, each item carrying memories I never thought I'd part with. I sold my car too, the one I had worked years to buy. There were nights when I went to bed hungry, pretending I wasn't, so there would be enough food for everyone else. Every sacrifice I made came from love. I thought they saw it. I thought they appreciated it. But instead of gratitude, I was met with laughter. They called me too soft, as if caring for them was some kind of weakness. Every word stung, but I kept quiet, convincing myself that family was worth it. The hardest part came from my mother. This was the woman who once cried on my shoulder, the same woman I stayed up with on countless nights when she thought the world was against her. I never imagined she would turn her back on me. But one afternoon, she did. She looked me in the eye, cold and unshaken, and told me to leave my own house. She stood there, siding with my siblings, as if I was some stranger who had overstayed my welcome. Her voice had no softness left. I could feel the walls of the house pressing against me, and suddenly it didn't feel like a home anymore. I stood in the doorway with nothing but a suitcase. That suitcase was the last thing that still belonged to me, the last reminder that I had once been the one holding everything together. My hands were shaking as I gripped the handle, but I forced myself not to cry. The house that I had built with sweat and sacrifice was no longer mine. They weren't just asking me to leave a building. They were asking me to disappear. In that moment, I realized they didn't only want shelter or support. They wanted me gone, erased, forgotten, like I had never been the one who carried them through the storm. The neighbors watched as I stepped outside. Some whispered, some stared, but none of them knew the truth. They didn't know that behind the closed doors of that house, my own family had turned me into a stranger. As I walked away, I felt the weight of betrayal heavier than the suitcase in my hand. Every step hurt, but there was also a strange strength growing inside me, a voice whispering that this wasn't the end. They thought they had broken me, that pushing me out would silence me forever. But deep inside, I knew something they didn't. I was not gone. I was only walking away for now. And the same love they called weakness would one day become my greatest power. Would you like me to continue writing the next part of the story, when you're thrown out and start planning revenge, in the same simple, viral style so it all flows together like a full script? Thrown out of my own house, I found myself sleeping on a friend's worn-out couch. This was not the life I had planned. I had built a home with sweat and small sacrifices, and now I lay on thin cushions watching the ceiling fan turn and thinking about every step that led me here. Shame burned me and I felt small and foolish. Visits from neighbors became awkward. Calls from friends stopped coming as often. But inside that shame a different feeling grew. It started as a whisper and then became a steady burn. I had been called soft my whole life, but softness had never stopped me from working or from loving. It had only made people underestimate me. I decided to use that underestimation against them. I could have begged and pleaded. I could have asked for mercy. Instead I chose silence and planning. On that couch I turned anger into a plan. I kept my thoughts in small, clear steps so the plan would be simple to follow. I watched my family from afar, listening to conversations when chance gave me the lead. I learned who controlled what, who paid which bills, and who thought they were untouchable. I watched routines and counted assumptions. Each small secret I collected was a step back toward my life. Nights on the couch were long but useful. I walked early in the mornings and kept my ears open. I met a young lawyer at a coffee shop who spoke quietly and knew the law. We talked about property and proof. I used some savings to pay for that advice. It was not flashy. It was steady work. I also read bank statements and bills, learning to see the lines that mattered. I copied names, dates, and numbers into a small notebook I kept hidden beneath the couch. There was a rush in each discovery, like finding a map to what I had lost. I found new strength in those pages. Friends who saw me calm stopped asking why I seemed so steady. They began to see that my quiet was not surrender. It was preparation. I avoided social media and kept my plans private. Silence kept my moves secret and gave me time to think. I did not sleep much, but the sleep I had was sharp and ready. In pockets of the day I worked small jobs and saved every coin. I did not waste energy on loud revenge. I built a plan that would be quiet and precise. When I spoke, it would be with facts. When I acted, it would be with force the law allowed. I wanted their mocking faces met with truth so heavy they could not laugh. The couch that had felt like punishment slowly became my strategy room. The rough fabric and the faded cushions held a new meaning. They held the space where I stopped being a victim and started becoming the person who would reclaim what was hers. They had thought they had erased me. They were wrong. I waited, patient and watchful, letting their confidence grow while I quietly built the case that would bring them down and take everything. I was rebuilding my life when I found a paper tucked behind an old photo. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It was a photocopy of a property transfer form with my house address. At first I thought it was a mistake. I read it twice. The dates did not match what I knew. My name was there, but listed as someone who had given permission, not as owner. I kept looking and found more things hidden in the house. Emails, photocopies and small notes added up to a plan. They had started moving my house out from under me while I slept on a couch. They thought I would never notice. But they had missed one thing. I found the original deed in a locked box behind loose tiles in the garage. The signature was mine and the date was clear. I made copies and began to connect the dots. Every new page was proof that their story was a lie. Anger rose, but I turned it into action. I listed who had keys, who paid which bills and who signed what. Small mistakes in their forms stood out like cracks. One transfer used a wrong middle name, another had a false date. Those errors were the openings I needed. A clerk at the land office quietly pulled archived files for me and printed past entries that showed my ownership history. Each printout pushed me closer to the truth. I also checked bank statements and receipts that showed transfers to unknown accounts. They were preparing to sell the house and take the money without telling me. The discovery hurt, but it gave me a clear path. I used my remaining savings to hire a lawyer and together we made a plan. She listened and then organized the facts into a legal strategy. We put holds on any transfer attempts and filed the right notices. I kept my moves private so they would not see the counterattack coming. At night I read paperwork by lamplight, underlining names and errors. My small notebook filled with dates and notes and became my map. Their greed made them careless and carelessness left traces. I collected those traces like tools. My lawyer moved quickly, sending letters that froze their plans and forced banks to pause. When one sibling called to ask why I was calm, I stayed quiet and let them worry instead. I learned that quiet endurance can be louder than shouting. The plan was not about revenge for show, it was about justice and taking back what was mine. When I finally saw how deep their scheme went, I felt sorrow and relief at once. Sorrow for the family that chose money over me, and relief because I could fight. The house had been theirs in secret, but the truth was on my side. I was no longer surprised by their cold faces at family meals. Now I had proof, and proof is hard to argue with. I kept my face steady and my plans secret, waiting for the right moment to show the papers. Weeks later, I walked back to my house. This time I wasn't carrying a suitcase, I was carrying power. I had spent every day in silence, working with lawyers, pulling records, and digging into the details of what my family had been hiding. Each document I uncovered was like a piece of armor. I didn't need to shout or beg anymore, because the truth was heavier than any of their insults. The same house they threw me out of was the same place they were using to run illegal side businesses. My blood relatives, the ones I sacrificed everything for, had turned my home into a base for their greedy side hustles. They thought nobody would notice, but I noticed. And soon, everyone else would too. The neighbors who once looked at me with pity began to whisper different things now. Rumors spread fast. People started to see that the family who mocked me were not as clean as they pretended to be. I didn't have to defend myself anymore, because their actions exposed them louder than I ever could. Walking down the street, I felt eyes on me. Not the eyes of shame like before, but eyes filled with curiosity. They wanted to know what I was planning, but I kept my silence. Power grows stronger when it's quiet. I didn't return with anger in my face. Anger can blind you, but calmness can destroy more effectively. I walked past the gate of my house slowly, almost as if I was visiting, but deep down I knew I was reclaiming. Every step I took was steady, because I had the law on my side. I wasn't afraid of their words anymore. I wasn't afraid of their numbers either. They had laughed when they kicked me out, but this time, I had the last laugh hidden in my bag in the form of official documents. My family didn't know I had already exposed their illegal work to the right people. They didn't know that the banks had flagged their accounts or that the lawyer had already filed notices in my name. They thought they were still in control. That's what made my return even sweeter. I let them believe in their little empire of lies for just a bit longer, because the silence before a storm is always the scariest. Standing outside, I looked at the windows glowing with light and remembered the nights I stayed hungry so they could eat. I remembered the mornings I woke up early to pay bills that weren't mine. And now those same people had dared to erase me. But the difference now was clear. Back then, I was soft. Today, I was sharp. They had created someone they could no longer manipulate. I didn't need to scream or fight. My silence was enough, because it carried the weight of proof, the law, and the truth. And when I finally opened that door, I knew the house would never belong to them again. I walked through the front door without knocking. For a moment, no one even looked up, as if I was just a shadow passing by. Then, when they realized it was me, laughter broke out. My siblings leaned back in their chairs, smirking, and one of them asked if I had come to beg for a spot on the couch. Another joked that maybe I wanted food. Their laughter filled the room, loud and cruel, bouncing off the walls that I had once painted with my own hands. They thought I was still the same person they had thrown out. They thought I was weak, desperate, broken. But they didn't know I had returned with more than pride. I had returned with proof, with power, with the law itself standing quietly behind me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked to the dining table, placed my bag down, and pulled out a stack of papers. Without a single word, I dropped them in the center. The laughter cut off instantly. The sound of the papers hitting the wood was louder than their voices. I stepped back and crossed my arms. The clock on the wall ticked so clearly that the silence became heavy, almost painful. One by one, they leaned forward, reading their own names printed on eviction notices. Faces that once shined with arrogance now turned pale. My eldest brother, the one who told me, "This isn't your house anymore," suddenly struggled to swallow. My sister's hand shook as she picked up the paper. My mother, who had told me to leave, blinked again and again, as if the words on the page might vanish if she stared hard enough. But the truth doesn't vanish. The truth stays. I didn't need to explain. The papers spoke for me. Each one carried my signature, my lawyer's stamp, and the court's seal. There was no room for argument. Their whispers of control, their fake confidence, their mocking laughter, all of it collapsed in that moment. The room smelled of fear. Even the air felt different, heavier, like it was pressing down on them. One of my brothers tried to laugh again, but his voice cracked. He asked if I was serious, and I only tilted my head, calm and steady. Another one shouted that I couldn't do this, that I was betraying family. That word, family, burned in my ears. Where was family when I was pushed out with only a suitcase? Where was family when I slept on a stranger's couch? Their silence then was my answer now. I stood tall, looking at each of them, and for the first time, none of them could meet my eyes. Power had shifted, and they knew it. Their laughter was gone, replaced by panic they couldn't hide. That was the moment I had waited for, the moment when the people who once made me feel small finally saw how big my silence had grown. That same evening, the security team arrived at my call. Their dark uniforms and steady steps filled the house with a kind of silence that no words could match. My siblings, who once puffed their chests and laughed at me, suddenly shrank back. The arrogance that had once dripped from their voices was gone. One by one, they were told to pack their things and leave. At first, they argued. They shouted, calling me ungrateful, selfish, even heartless. But none of those words could undo the truth stamped on those eviction papers. Their voices cracked as they tried to fight, but the guards stood firm, waiting with cold patience. I watched as my eldest brother, the one who had told me, "This isn't your house anymore," dragged a bag of clothes across the floor, his face red with anger and shame. My sister slammed drawers shut, trying to grab what she could, tears streaming down her face. The same people who had laughed at my pain were now crying in front of me, and I didn't feel guilt. I felt justice. My mother fell to her knees, begging me to stop, her voice trembling with desperation. But her words could not erase the nights I slept on a stranger's couch or the days I walked past this house knowing they had stolen it from me. Outside, the neighbors had gathered, their eyes wide as they watched everything unfold. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others simply stood in silence, taking in the scene. These were the same neighbors who had pitied me when I walked away with only a suitcase. Now they were watching the fall of an empire built on lies and entitlement. The house that had once echoed with my siblings' mocking laughter now echoed with their cries. One by one, they carried their belongings out. Broken furniture, torn clothes, half-packed boxes, all thrown together in a rush. The same people who had once called me soft were now the ones begging for mercy. But there was no mercy left to give. They had crossed the line when they turned me into a stranger in my own home. Forgiveness might heal mistakes, but betrayal this deep doesn't wash away with tears. As the last of their things were dragged out, I stood at the doorway. For the first time in months, the house felt like mine again. The air seemed lighter, the walls no longer heavy with their arrogance. My siblings stood outside, still shouting, still blaming me, but their voices sounded distant, almost powerless. The neighbors kept watching, not with pity this time, but with respect. They had seen the strong one rise from the soft one. They had seen justice. And as the doors closed behind me, I knew I had taken back not just my home, but also my place in the story they tried to erase me from. With my family gone, the house finally felt alive again. The air no longer carried their shouting or mocking laughter. For the first time in a long time, I could sit in my own living room and feel peace. I rebuilt everything, not just the broken furniture and cracked walls, but myself. Every nail hammered in, every room painted fresh, was a reminder that I had survived what was meant to destroy me. The house became more than shelter, it became my fortress, a symbol that no one would ever take advantage of me again. People in the neighborhood watched closely. Some asked why I didn't forgive, why I didn't call my family back. I only smiled. Forgiveness is for mistakes, not for betrayal. Love without respect is nothing but slavery, and I had freed myself from that chain. They kicked me out of my own home and expected me to stay broken. But I returned stronger, sharper, untouchable. Every corner of the house reminded me of a lesson. The doorway where I once stood with only a suitcase now became the doorway where I welcomed my strength back. The couch where I used to cry became the couch where I planned my future. I no longer felt shame for being too soft. That softness had carried me through pain and turned into steel. So when people asked me again why I didn't take my family back, I answered with a quiet smile, they kicked me out of my own home. I only returned the favor. And in that smile was all the proof anyone needed that I had one.